I was called the family disappointment for 5 years before I discovered my parents had been stealing from me the entire time. They cut me out of a $2 million family trust for being financially irresponsible. Then I found the bank statements that changed everything. Let me tell you how I uncovered the truth and rebuilt my life from scratch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the Westfield family meant living with sky-high expectations. My name is Olivia Westfield, and I'm 31 years old. Until recently, I believed I was the black sheep of a highly successful, multi-generational family business dynasty. But sometimes the story we're told about ourselves isn't the real story at all. Our family home in Greenwich, Connecticut was a pristine colonial mansion set on 3 manicured acres, the kind of place where fingerprints on the stainless steel appliances were treated as personal offenses. My father, Richard Westfield, built Westfield Financial Partners from a modest investment firm into a powerhouse managing over $800 million in assets. My mother, Eleanor, came from old money and served on the boards of 5 different charitable foundations. Success wasn't just encouraged in our family, it was the baseline expectation. Then there was my younger brother, Ethan, 3 years my junior. He was the undisputed star of the family from the moment he could talk. By age 6, he could recite stock market figures that impressed my father's colleagues. In high school, he was class president, valedictorian, and state tennis champion. While I struggled through advanced calculus, Ethan seemed to absorb complex mathematical concepts through osmosis. He was the golden child, and everyone knew it, especially me. Olivia, why can't you apply yourself like your brother? Became the soundtrack of my adolescence. It wasn't that I was failing. I maintained a solid B+ average, played field hockey, and had a decent group of friends. But in the Westfield household, being good wasn't good enough when someone else was being great. Don't misunderstand me. I loved my brother. Ethan never deliberately tried to outshine me. He would often help me with homework and defended me when our parents' criticism became too harsh. The problem wasn't Ethan. It was the relentless comparison that eroded my sense of self-worth. Why can't you be more like your brother at a time? Despite the pressure, I managed to get accepted to Northeastern University, where I studied marketing. Not the finance degree my father wanted, but a respectable field nonetheless. College became my first taste of freedom, a place where the Westfield name didn't precede me. I thrived in the creative aspects of my program, discovering a talent for understanding consumer psychology and digital marketing strategies. For the first time, I felt like I might have found my place. During my sophomore year, my grandfather passed away. Harold Westfield had built the foundation of our family wealth through smart real estate investments in the 1960s. He was a serious man who rarely showed affection, but I had always sensed he had a soft spot for me. At his funeral, amid the somber faces of New England's financial elite, I learned about the Westfield Family Trust. Your grandfather established the trust to provide for future generations, my father explained during a family meeting after the service. There's approximately $2 million in assets that will be distributed among family members according to the terms he established. My heart raced with unexpected hope. Maybe, just maybe, my grandfather had seen something in me that my parents missed. The distributions begin at age 30, my father continued, with quarterly payments from the trust's investment returns. Ethan will receive his first distribution in 10 years, and Olivia, yours would begin in 7 years. Would begin, not will begin. The distinction wasn't lost on me. What do you mean, would? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. My father cleared his throat, exchanging a look with my mother. There are conditions. Grandfather wanted to ensure the money would be managed responsibly. The trustees, your mother and I, have some discretion over the distributions based on demonstrated financial responsibility. The subtext was clear. Prove yourself worthy, or get nothing. I'd like to say this revelation lit a fire under me, that I became determined to prove my financial acumen to earn my birthright. But the truth is messier. The trust became yet another measure by which I felt destined to fall short. Rather than inspiring me to change, it reinforced the narrative I'd internalized since childhood, that I wasn't quite good enough to be a true Westfield. I graduated with my marketing degree and decent grades, then landed a job at a mid-sized advertising agency in Boston. The starting salary was modest but fair for the industry, $48,000 a year. My parents were unimpressed. "That's what you'll be making with a 4-year degree?" my father commented when I called home with the news. Ethan's summer internship at Morgan Stanley paid nearly that much. I swallowed my disappointment at his reaction and focused on the independence my new job would provide. I found a small apartment with a roommate in Somerville and began building my adult life. The freedom was exhilarating, making decisions without scrutiny, decorating my space with colorful artwork instead of the muted tones my mother preferred, eating cereal for dinner if I felt like it. Small rebellions, perhaps, but they were mine. The first year of my professional life passed in a blur of client meetings, campaign deadlines, and weekend brunches with new friends who knew nothing about the Westfield legacy or my seemingly perpetual failure to live up to it. I earned a small raise and a positive performance review. For the first time, I felt competent, maybe even good at something. Then came my brother's graduation from Princeton, summa cum laude, with a double major in economics and computer science. The celebration dinner at Le Bernardin in Manhattan might as well have been coronation. My father ordered $600 bottles of wine and invited several managing partners from his firm who took turns predicting Ethan's meteoric rise through the financial world. "Westfield Financial's future CEO right here," one ruddy-faced partner declared, clapping my brother on the shoulder. I sat quietly, sipping my wine, trying to be happy for Ethan. He caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. He knew what these events were like for me. Later that night, slightly drunk on expensive Bordeaux and chronic inadequacy, I made my first significant financial mistake. I applied for a credit card with a $20,000 limit, received instant approval thanks to my family name and decent credit score, and promptly booked a 2-week vacation to Italy. A solo trip to celebrate. What? My brother's success? My own ongoing mediocrity? I wasn't entirely sure, but the recklessness of the decision gave me a strange thrill. The Italy trip was glorious, wandering through ancient ruins in Rome, drinking espresso in piazzas, eating pasta so delicious it made me weep. For 14 days, I wasn't a disappointment or a backup plan. I was just Olivia, an American woman exploring the world on her own terms. I bought leather boots in Florence, glass jewelry in Venice, and designer sunglasses in Milan. I took cooking, classes, and wine tours. I said yes to experiences without calculating their value against my monthly budget. When I returned home with a maxed-out credit card and memories I couldn't put a price on, reality came crashing back. My modest salary couldn't make a dent in the $19,700 balance I'd accumulated. The minimum payments alone ate a significant portion of my discretionary income. I picked up freelance marketing projects on weekends and cut back on everything non-essential, but I was barely treading water. Pride kept me from asking my family for help. I could already hear my father's lecture about fiscal responsibility and impulsive decisions. So I applied for another credit card to transfer the balance and get 6 months of zero interest. A temporary solution that I convinced myself would be enough time to increase my income or receive a significant bonus. Neither materialized quickly enough. Within 2 years, I had accumulated nearly $35,000 in credit card debt across 3 different cards, using one to make payments on the others in a precarious financial juggling act. The stress was constant, a background hum of anxiety that accompanied every purchase, no matter how small. I developed insomnia, lying awake, calculating and recalculating payment scenarios that never quite balanced. Meanwhile, Ethan had joined our father's firm and was already managing his own small portfolio of clients. He purchased a waterfront condo in Boston's Seaport District and drove a Tesla Model S. At family gatherings, the contrast between our lives grew more stark with each passing holiday. Investment management is in the Westfield blood, my father would proclaim, raising a glass to Ethan during Thanksgiving dinner. Some people just understand money. It's intuitive. The implication hung in the air. I clearly wasn't one of those people. My relationship with my parents grew increasingly strained. Every conversation seemed to circle back to my financial situation, which they somehow always knew was precarious despite my never discussing it with them. "You know, Olivia," my mother said during one particularly tense Sunday dinner at their home, "there are entry-level positions at your father's firm that pay much better than what you're making in advertising." She said the word as if it were synonymous with street performance. "I like my job, Mom," I replied, pushing food around my plate. "Marketing uses different skills than finance, but it's still a legitimate career." "Of course. It is, dear," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that some careers build wealth, while others, well, they pay the bills, hopefully." By my 28th birthday, I had received 2 promotions at the agency and was managing small accounts independently. My salary had increased to $67,000, respectable, but still modest compared to Ethan's 6-figure income. More importantly, I had developed a reputation for creative campaign strategies that connected with younger demographics. I was good at my job, and for brief moments, that knowledge eclipsed the lifelong feeling of inadequacy my family had instilled. The debt, however, remained. While I'd managed to pay down about $8,000 through aggressive budgeting and some freelance work, I still owed around $27,000 across 2 credit cards. The interest rates after the promotional periods had expired were crushing, 22% and 24% respectively. I was making progress, but it was painfully slow. Then came the conversation that would alter the course of my life. It was spring, the kind of perfect New England day that makes you forget the brutal winter just passed. My parents invited me for lunch at their club, an old money establishment where the menu had no prices and members still referred to each other by last names. I should have known something was wrong when they didn't include Ethan in the invitation. We were seated on the terrace overlooking the golf course, my mother in her pearls and my father in a blazer with the club crest embroidered on the pocket. After ordering drinks and making small talk about the unusually warm weather, my father folded his hands on the table, his business posture. "Olivia, we need to discuss the family trust," he began, his voice measured. "As you know, you turn 30 in less than 2 years, which would typically be when your distributions begin." The emphasis on would sent a familiar chill through me. "As trustees, your mother and I have been monitoring your financial decisions since the trust was revealed to you. It was your grandfather's explicit wish that the money be given only to those who demonstrated financial responsibility." I gripped my water glass tightly, already knowing where this was heading, but powerless to stop it. "We've become aware of your significant credit card debt," my mother added, her voice lowered as if speaking of a scandalous disease. "Multiple cards, nearly maxed out. Using one card to pay another. These are not the actions of someone prepared to manage a substantial inheritance." "How do you even know about my finances?" I asked, heat rising in my cheeks. "Those are private accounts." My father had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "As trustees, we have certain rights to information when evaluating distribution decisions. It's all legal and covered in the trust documentation. We've made a decision," my mother continued, her voice gentle but firm. We're invoking the responsibility clause to remove you from the trust distributions. Your portion will be reallocated to Ethan and any future grandchildren. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Despite my complicated relationship with the trust and the expectations it represented, being officially deemed unworthy hit with unexpected force. This wasn't just about money. It was the final, irrefutable verdict on my place in the family hierarchy. "You're cutting me out completely?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a punishment, Olivia," my father said, reaching for his scotch. "It's a protection, for you and for the family legacy. You've demonstrated that you don't have the financial acumen to handle substantial assets. Giving you access to millions would be like handing a loaded gun to a child." I flinched at the analogy. A loaded gun. My debt was significant, yes, but I was making payments, learning from my mistakes. I wasn't self-destructing. I was struggling, like many young professionals. "This is actually a kindness," my mother added, patting my hand condescendingly. "Money like this can ruin people who aren't prepared for it. We're saving you from yourself." I sat in stunned silence as they continued explaining how this was for my own good, how perhaps someday I might demonstrate enough responsibility for them to reconsider, how I should focus on managing my little marketing job and paying down my debt. When the Cobb salad I'd ordered arrived, I couldn't take a single bite. The familiar feeling of not measuring up had crystallized into something harder and colder, the certainty that in my parents' eyes, I never would. As we prepared to leave, my father signed the lunch bill without glancing at the total, probably more than I had left for groceries that week. "I know this feels harsh now, Olivia, but one day you'll understand. Family money comes with family responsibility." I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down or saying something I'd regret. We walked to the parking lot in silence, the perfect spring day now seeming like a cruel contrast to the winter in my heart. At my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with fading paint that looked particularly shabby in the club's lot, my mother hugged me stiffly. "We still expect you for Sunday dinner next week," she said. "This doesn't change the fact that you're our daughter." But it had changed everything. As I drove away from the club, tears blurring my vision, I realized I had two choices: accept their assessment of me as the family failure, or find a way to prove them wrong. At that moment, I wasn't sure which path I would take, only that I couldn't continue living in the shadow of expectations I was apparently never meant to fulfill. What I didn't know then was that the true revelation, the one that would upend everything I thought I knew about my family, was still to come. And it would arrive in the most unexpected form, a stack of bank statements that had never been meant for my eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The week after being cut from the family trust was one of the darkest periods of my life. I called in sick to work for 3 days, something I'd never done before, and barely left my apartment. My roommate, Zoe, a nurse who worked night shifts, would leave cups of tea outside my bedroom door, along with notes offering to talk if I needed it. I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that your own parents have officially declared you a failure? On the 4th day, I forced myself to shower, put on real clothes, and return to work. The advertising agency where I worked occupied 3 floors of a renovated textile mill in Boston's Innovation District. Exposed brick walls, steel beams, and massive windows created an atmosphere of creative possibility that had always energized me. Now, I moved through the space like a ghost, going through the motions of checking emails and attending meetings, while my mind replayed my parents' words on an endless loop. Giving you access to millions would be like handing a loaded gun to a child. During the afternoon creative brainstorm for a new athletic apparel client, I sat silently while my colleagues pitched ideas. Marco, our creative director, noticed my unusual quiet. "Olivia, You usually have great insights for this demographic. Any thoughts? All eyes turned to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but found I had nothing to contribute. The shame of being deemed irresponsible, untrustworthy, was too fresh. Sorry, I mumbled. I'm not feeling well. I might need to head home. Marco frowned with concern. Take the rest of the day. We'll manage here. I gathered my things under the curious gazes of my team. As I headed toward the elevator, I heard footsteps behind me. Liv, wait up. I turned to see Cameron Wright, the agency's finance director, jogging to catch up with me. At 38, Cameron was about 7 years older than me and had joined the company 2 years ago after a successful career at a larger agency in New York. With his neatly trimmed beard and stylish glasses, he projected a calm competence that seemed to exist outside the creative chaos of our workplace. We'd worked together occasionally on client budgets, but weren't particularly close. You okay? He asked once we were alone in the elevator. You seem, I don't know, not yourself. I stared at the descending floor numbers. Just some family stuff. I'll be fine. Cameron nodded, not pushing further. If you need someone to talk to who isn't directly in your creative team, my door's open. Sometimes an outside perspective helps. The unexpected offer of support from someone I barely knew almost broke the fragile composure I'd been maintaining. I managed a tight smile and nod before hurrying out of the elevator when it reached the lobby. That night, I finally answered Ethan's calls after ignoring them for days. My brother had been trying to reach me since the lunch with our parents, leaving increasingly concerned voicemails. Liv, it's me. Please call back. I just heard what happened. Olivia, seriously, pick up. We need to talk about this trust situation. I'm worried about you. Just let me know you're okay. When I finally answered, his relief was palpable. Thank God. I was about to drive to Boston and bang on your door. I'm fine, I said flatly. Congratulations on your increased inheritance. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he might have hung up. I didn't know they were going to do that, he finally said, his voice quiet. I found out after the fact. And I'm sure you immediately refused the additional money, I replied, the bitterness I felt seeping into every word. Another pause. It's complicated, Liv. Dad's making me a junior partner at the firm. There are expectations. Right. Always expectations for the golden child. Heaven forbid you disappoint them like I do. That's not fair, Ethan protested. I've never competed with you. I've always supported you. I sank onto my bed, suddenly exhausted. I know. I'm sorry. It's not your fault they've spent our entire lives comparing us. Look, let me help you with the credit card debt. I can easily— No, I cut him off firmly. Absolutely not. I got myself into this, and I'll get myself out. Liv, don't be stubborn. It's just money. It's not just money, I snapped. It's my independence, my self-respect. The one thing I have left that's entirely mine is my problem to solve. Ethan sighed. At least come over for dinner this weekend. Rebecca's been asking about you. Rebecca was Ethan's fiancée, a brilliant environmental attorney I actually liked quite a bit. She came from a middle-class background and had worked her way through law school, which gave her a perspective my family often lacked. I don't know if I'm up for socializing right now, I hedged. It'll just be the three of us, he promised. No parents, no trust talk unless you bring it up. Just food and maybe a movie or something. The thought of facing anyone from my family was exhausting, but the alternative was another weekend alone with my spiraling thoughts. Fine. Saturday? Great. Ethan sounded genuinely pleased. 6 o'clock. I'm making that pasta thing you like. After hanging up, I stared at the ceiling of my small bedroom. The posters and photos I'd tacked up to make the space feel like mine now seemed childish, like playing house rather than actually building a life. I was 28 years old, supposedly a full adult, yet I felt like I was back in high school. Constantly. Falling short, forever the disappointment. The next day at work, I threw myself into the athletic wear campaign with renewed determination. If I couldn't change my parents' opinion of me, I could at least prove my professional worth. By lunchtime, I had developed a comprehensive social media strategy targeting women who felt excluded by traditional fitness messaging. Those who didn't have perfect bodies or elite athletic abilities, but still wanted to be active and comfortable. "This is fantastic," Marco said, reviewing my presentation mock-ups. "This authenticity angle is exactly what Velocity Activewear needs to differentiate themselves." The small victory couldn't erase what had happened with the trust, but it provided a momentary respite from the constant feeling of inadequacy. As I gathered my things to grab lunch, there was a knock at my cubicle. Cameron stood there, holding 2 paper bags from the sandwich shop downstairs. "I grabbed an extra," he said. "Turkey avocado on wheat, right? I've seen you eat it before." I was surprised he'd noticed something so trivial about me. "That's really thoughtful. Thanks." He shrugged. I was going anyway. He gestured to the small conference room down the hall. "Mind some company? I could use a break from spreadsheets." We settled into the empty conference room, unwrapping our sandwiches in companionable silence. Through the windows, Boston Harbor stretched blue and vast, dotted with sailboats enjoying the spring weather. "So," Cameron said after a few bites, "still dealing with that family stuff?" I hesitated, then decided I had nothing to lose by talking to someone completely outside my family's sphere of influence. "My parents cut me out of the family trust because they think I'm financially irresponsible." Cameron raised his eyebrows, but didn't immediately respond with the platitudes I expected. "That sounds like there's a lot more to the story." Something about his measured response, the lack of judgment, broke my carefully constructed dam. Words poured out of me. About growing up as the other child, about the credit card debt that had started with a desperate bid for some kind of self-determination, about the lunch where my parents had calmly dismantled what remained of my sense of belonging. Cameron listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful rather than pitying. When I finally ran out of words, he nodded slowly. "That's a lot to process," he said. "And I say this as someone who actually understands family trusts and fiduciary responsibilities. Their behavior seems extreme for what amounts to manageable credit card debt." $35,000 isn't exactly small, I said, embarrassed to say the number out loud. "It's not insignificant," he agreed, "but it's also not catastrophic, especially in the context of responsible management going forward. Most people have some financial setbacks in their 20s while they're figuring things out." His matter-of-fact tone was strangely comforting, not dismissive of the situation, but not treating it as the career-ending moral failure my parents considered it. "The real issue here isn't the debt," Cameron continued, gathering the wrappers from our lunch. "It's that your parents have made money the measure of your worth. That's a tough framework to live in." His insight struck me like a physical blow. He'd articulated in one sentence what I'd felt my entire life but never been able to name. "Sorry, if that's overstepping," he added, noticing my expression. "No, it's accurate," I admitted. "Everything in my family gets reduced to financial terms. Success, failure, worthiness. It's all about the numbers." Cameron nodded. "I grew up in a similar environment, though not nearly as high stakes as yours sounds. My father was a bank manager in a small town in Michigan. Money was his religion." "How did you escape?" I asked, genuinely curious. His laugh was warm and surprisingly youthful. "Who says I escaped? I'm a finance director. I literally spend my days managing other people's money." "But you seem, I don't know, balanced about it?" "That came later, after I nearly destroyed myself trying to meet impossible standards." He glanced at his watch. "Which is a story for another time. We should head back. As we walked back to our respective departments, Cameron paused. If you're interested in actually addressing the debt rather than just feeling bad about it, I could help you create a debt reduction plan, pro bono, as a colleague. His offer caught me off guard. Why would you do that? His expression turned serious. Because I've been where you are, and someone helped me. Sometimes all it takes is one person who believes you're not defined by your financial mistakes. I considered his offer. Part of me was hesitant to reveal the full extent of my financial mess to a coworker, but a stronger part recognized the lifeline he was extending. Okay, I said finally. I'd appreciate that. Great. Let me know when you're free. And bring all your statements, credit cards, bank accounts, everything. No plan works without complete information. That Saturday, I arrived at Ethan's seaport condo carrying a bottle of wine I could barely afford and a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Despite his assurance that our parents wouldn't be discussed, I couldn't shake the feeling of walking into enemy territory. Rebecca answered the door, her warm smile immediately putting me at ease. With her curly hair pulled into a messy bun and flour dusting her sweater, she looked nothing like the polished corporate attorney who had argued cases before the state Supreme Court. "Thank God you're here," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Your brother is having some kind of culinary crisis involving garlic, and I have no idea how to help." The evening was surprisingly pleasant. Ethan's pasta thing, a complicated carbonara that he'd learned to make during a summer abroad in Italy, was delicious. Rebecca kept the conversation flowing with stories about her latest environmental case, and for a few hours, I forgot. About trusts and expectations and disappointment. It wasn't until after dinner, when Rebecca excused herself to make a work call, that Ethan brought up the situation. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said, refilling our wine glasses. "And I want you to know I think it's bullshit." The profanity startled me. Ethan rarely cursed and almost never criticized our parents. "Cutting you out completely is extreme," he continued. "Yes, you've made some financial choices they wouldn't make, but who hasn't? It's not like you gambled away a fortune or developed a drug habit." "Try telling them that," I said, sipping my wine. "In their eyes, credit card debt is basically a moral failing on par with armed robbery." Ethan laughed, then grew serious. "There's something else. Something that's been bothering me about this whole situation." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. "The trust terms. I've never actually seen them, have you?" I shook my head. "No. Just heard Dad's summary that day after Grandfather's funeral." "Don't you think that's odd? A legal document that supposedly has all these conditions about financial responsibility, and neither of us has ever seen the actual text?" The thought had never occurred to me. In the Westfield family, our father's word was treated as gospel. Questioning him simply wasn't done. "Maybe there's a copy in Grandfather's study," Ethan suggested. "You know, at the summer house in the Berkshires. Our grandfather's summer home had been left to my father, but remained largely unchanged since his death. The study, lined with leather-bound books and filing cabinets, had been Harold Westfield's sanctuary. Even if there is, how would we get it? The house is closed up until Memorial Day, and Dad keeps it locked." A sly smile spread across Ethan's face. "Remember the summer I was 14 and kept sneaking out to meet Caitlin Jenkins from the next property over?" I laughed at the memory. "You climbed down the oak tree outside your window. And remember how I got back in when I realized Dad had started locking the doors at night? You found the spare key he kept." My eyes widened as I realized what he was suggesting. "Ethan Westfield, are you proposing we break into the family summer home to search for trust documents?" He shrugged, the picture of innocence except for the mischief in his eyes. "It's not breaking in if we use a key. And technically, you're still a beneficiary of Grandfather's estate, even if you're not getting trust distributions. It was outrageous. Potentially illegal. Definitely against everything we'd been raised to respect about privacy and propriety. "When do we go?" I asked. The next weekend found us driving the 2.5 hours to the Berkshires in Ethan's Tesla. He had told our parents he needed to check on some plumbing issues at the summer house ahead of the season, a plausible excuse that they readily accepted. The Westfield summer home sat on 5 acres overlooking a small lake, its weathered shingles and wide porches giving it a deceptively casual appearance that belied its multi-million-dollar value. As we pulled into the gravel driveway, memories flooded back. Summer sailing lessons, 4th of July barbecues, covert midnight swims when our parents were asleep. "Home, sweet summer home," Ethan murmured, retrieving the hidden key from inside. A fake rock near the garden shed. Still exactly where Dad always keeps it. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and the lemon oil the caretaker used on the antique furniture. Everything was shrouded in white dust covers, giving the rooms a ghostly appearance. We moved through the silent house toward the rear study, our footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Grandfather's study remained essentially untouched since his death. The heavy mahogany desk still dominated the space, facing the large windows that overlooked the lake. Built-in bookshelves lined the walls, interspersed with filing cabinets and glass-fronted display cases holding various nautical instruments from his days as an amateur sailor. "Where do we even start?" I asked, surveying the room. Ethan moved directly to the large portrait of our grandmother that hung behind the desk. Remember how Grandfather was about security? Always talking about keeping important documents safe? He carefully removed the painting from the wall, revealing a wall safe I'd never known existed. "How did you know about that?" I asked, impressed. "I came in here looking for cash one summer when I was 17. Saw him opening it." Ethan examined the combination lock. "Now we just need the combination." "Which we obviously don't have," I pointed out. "Don't be so sure." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos. "Remember that weird string of numbers and letters Grandfather had framed in his office in the city? The one he told everyone was an inside joke with Grandmother?" I vaguely recalled a small framed piece with an odd alphanumeric sequence. It had hung beside his desk for as long as I could remember. "I always thought it looked like a code," Ethan explained, showing me a photo he'd taken of the framed piece. "So I took a picture of it a few years ago, thinking it might be passwords or something useful." "You think it's the safe combination? That seems obvious for someone so security conscious." Ethan grinned. "Hiding in plain sight is sometimes the best security. No one would think the combination would be displayed prominently in his main office." He began turning the dial, following the sequence from the photo. After a few attempts and adjustments, we heard a satisfying click. The safe door swung open, revealing several neatly labeled folders, a small cash box, and some jewelry cases that presumably held our grandmother's heirlooms. Ethan extracted the folders and placed them on the desk. "Property deeds, stock certificates, insurance policies," he read from the labels. "Here we go. Westfield Family Trust, original documents." With careful fingers, he opened the folder and spread out its contents. The legal language was dense, full of whereas and heretofores, but we scanned for the key passages about distributions and conditions. "This is weird," Ethan said after several minutes. "I don't see anything about financial responsibility determinations or trustee discretion for our distributions." I leaned over his shoulder, reading along. "It just says beneficiaries receive quarterly distributions from the trust's earnings beginning at age 30, with the option to receive a lump sum of up to 25% of their share upon reaching 35, and the remainder at 40. We exchanged puzzled looks. "So, according to the actual document," I said slowly, "there's no condition that would allow them to cut me out based on my financial habits?" "Not that I can see," Ethan confirmed, flipping through the pages. The only provisions for exclusion involve criminal convictions or legal incompetence, like if you were declared mentally unfit to manage your affairs. My mind reeled. Then they lied. They've been holding this over my head for years, making me feel like I had to earn my inheritance by meeting their definition of financial responsibility, and it was never even in the trust terms. There has to be some explanation, Ethan said, though he looked troubled. Maybe there's an amendment or a codicil somewhere. We searched the remaining folders but found nothing that modified the original trust terms. As Ethan continued examining the documents, I wandered the study, trying to process this revelation. My gaze fell on a filing cabinet drawer labeled Bank Statements, Personal. Almost without conscious decision, I pulled open the drawer. Inside were neatly organized folders by year, going back more than a decade. I shouldn't snoop, I told myself. These were private records. But hadn't my parents invaded my financial privacy to judge me unworthy? I pulled out a folder from 3 years ago, shortly after grandfather's death and the trust revelation. Inside were monthly statements from various banks and investment firms. Most were straightforward, routine transactions, expected balances. Then I noticed a recurring transfer on my father's personal account statements, $30,000 on the 15th of each month, transferred to an account number I didn't recognize. Ethan, I called, my voice strange even to my own ears. Do you know what this account number might be? He glanced at where I was pointing. No idea. Why? Because Dad's been transferring $30,000 a month to this account for at least 3 years. That's over $1 million. Ethan frowned, taking the statement from me. That could be anything. Investment account, maybe? Tax planning? Every month, like clockwork. The same amount. Doesn't that seem odd? We looked at each other, the same thought clearly forming. Together, we began pulling statements from multiple years, tracking the mysterious transfers back through time. They had begun exactly 1 month after grandfather's death, when the trust came under our parents' control as trustees. This doesn't necessarily mean anything nefarious, Ethan said, though he sounded uncertain. There could be a legitimate explanation. I reached for my phone and opened my banking app. What if we try to verify the receiving account? If it's another family account, I might be able to find references to it in my records from joint family trips or events. After several minutes of searching, I found what I was looking for, a small transfer from years ago when I'd repaid my mother for purchasing theater tickets. The account number was a match to the mystery account receiving the monthly $30,000. It's Mom's personal account, I said, showing Ethan the screen. Not a family account, not an investment vehicle. Her personal account that Dad doesn't have access to. The implications were staggering. My mother, always impeccably dressed in designer clothes, always with the newest luxury car, always taking expensive wellness retreats to exotic locations. Was she funding this lifestyle directly from the family trust? We need to see the trust bank statements, Ethan said grimly, not just the legal documents. It took us another hour of searching before we found them, hidden in a separate locked drawer of the filing cabinet. The key had been taped to the underside of a nearby bookshelf, another of our grandfather's security measures that Ethan somehow knew about. The trust statements confirmed our growing suspicion. Each month, approximately $30,000 was withdrawn from the trust with the description administrative expenses. According to the trust document we'd found, administrative expenses were limited to necessary legal fees, accounting costs, and reasonable trustee compensation, not regular massive withdrawals. They've been stealing from the trust, I whispered, the reality sinking in. From our inheritance. From us. Ethan's face had gone pale. Not just stealing. They cut you out and told you it was because you're financially irresponsible, when all along, They were the irresponsible ones, I finished. The hypocrites. We sat in silence, surrounded by the evidence of our parents' betrayal. The lakeside shadows lengthened as afternoon turned to evening, but neither of us moved to turn on a light. "What do we do now?" I finally asked. Ethan gathered the damning statements and trust documents, his expression resolute. "We take these to Rebecca. As an attorney, she'll know what our options are." As we carefully replaced everything except the papers we were taking, making sure the study looked undisturbed, I felt something shift inside me. The shame and inadequacy that had defined my relationship with my family for so long was transforming into something else. A cold, clear anger, yes, but also a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't the irresponsible one. I hadn't failed some arbitrary moral test of financial worthiness. I had been lied to, manipulated, and stolen from by the very people who had positioned themselves as my financial and moral superiors. The bank statements had changed everything, and so had I. The drive back from the Berkshires was mostly silent. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, while I stared out the window at the darkening landscape. The file of bank statements and trust documents sat between us on the console, seemingly ordinary papers that had shattered our understanding of our family. "I keep thinking there must be some explanation," Ethan finally said as we approached the outskirts of Boston. "Some reason that would make this make sense." "Like what?" I asked, my voice flat. "That Mom and Dad have secretly been funding orphanages with trust money? That there's an accounting error repeating the same exact mistake every month for years?" He sighed. "I know. I've built my whole life around following their example, working at Dad's firm, planning to take over someday. What does it mean if that example is corrupt at its core?" I hadn't considered how this revelation might be affecting Ethan. While I had always existed on the periphery of the Westfield legacy, he had been groomed from childhood to be its standard-bearer. "It means you have a choice about what kind of legacy you want to create," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Better than theirs." Rebecca was waiting at their condo when we arrived, her legal notepad already out. As an environmental attorney who regularly took on corporate polluters, she had a natural skepticism toward wealth and power that made her the perfect person to assess our situation objectively. "Start from the beginning," she said, once we were settled in the living room, "and show me everything you found." For the next 2 hours, we laid out the evidence. The original trust documents that contained no financial responsibility conditions, the bank statements showing the suspicious transfers, the timeline that connected everything. Rebecca took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly listening with her brow furrowed in concentration. "Based on what you've shown me," she said when we'd finished, "there appears to be a clear breach of fiduciary duty. As trustees, your parents are legally obligated to manage the trust assets for the benefit of the beneficiaries, you two, not for their personal gain." "So they've broken the law?" I asked. "Civil law, yes. This isn't criminal theft in the traditional sense, but it is a serious violation of trust law." Rebecca tapped her pen against her notepad. "You have several options here. The most aggressive would be to petition the court to remove them as trustees and seek recovery of the misappropriated funds, plus damages." The thought of taking my parents to court made my stomach churn despite everything. What are the less aggressive options? You could confront them privately with the evidence and negotiate a settlement, restoration of your status as a beneficiary, repayment of the misused funds, and perhaps installation of an independent co-trustee to prevent future abuses. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "And my position at the firm?" Rebecca's expression softened. "That complicates things. Your father can't legally fire you for taking action regarding the trust. That would be retaliation. But he could make your work life difficult in ways that would be hard to prove as retaliatory." "I need to think," Ethan said, standing abruptly. "This is a lot." He walked out onto the balcony, leaving Rebecca and me alone. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her quietly. Rebecca considered me thoughtfully. "What do you want, Olivia?" "Not what would hurt your parents the least, or cause the least family disruption." "What outcome would make you feel whole?" It was a question no one had ever asked me before. What did I want? Not what would please my parents or match Ethan's achievements, or satisfy social expectations. What would make me feel whole? "I want acknowledgement," I said slowly, the realization forming as I spoke. Not just of what they did wrong, but of who I actually am. That I'm not a failure or a disappointment. That I've been navigating my own path with integrity, even with the credit card missteps. Rebecca nodded. "That's a good starting point. Though I should note that financial compensation is also appropriate here. They've essentially stolen your birthright while simultaneously shaming you for much smaller financial issues." The contrast was jarring when framed that way. My parents had siphoned over $1 million from a trust meant for their children, while treating my $35,000 credit card debt as a moral failing worthy of disinheritance. "I'll need to speak with an attorney of my own," I said. "Someone who specializes in trust litigation." "I have a colleague who'd be perfect," Rebecca replied. "Sarah Chen at Blackwell & Associates. She's tough but fair, and she understands family dynamics in these situations." As we continued discussing next steps, my phone rang. Cameron's name appeared on the screen, surprising me. It was Saturday evening, not a typical time for a work colleague to call. "Sorry, I should take this," I said, stepping into the kitchen. For privacy. "Hello? Olivia. Hi." Cameron sounded slightly hesitant. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "No, it's fine. What's up?" "I've been thinking about your situation, and I took the liberty of creating a preliminary debt management plan. I know we said we'd do it together, but I had some time this weekend and—" His voice trailed off, as if realizing he might have overstepped. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught me off guard. "That's incredibly kind," I said. "Thank you." "It's just a starting point. We should still meet to go through everything properly. But I ran some numbers, and with your current salary and if you're willing to make a few adjustments to your expenses, you could potentially be debt-free in about 3 years. 3 years. It sounded both achingly long and surprisingly manageable. "I'd like to see the plan. I could email it, but honestly, it would be better to walk through it together. Any chance you're free for coffee tomorrow? I know it's Sunday." "But tomorrow works," I said, cutting him off. The idea of focusing on a concrete financial plan with someone who saw me as capable rather than as a disappointment was deeply appealing. "There's a cafe near my apartment called Revelai, say 11 Dao?" After arranging the details with Cameron, I rejoined Rebecca and Ethan, who had come back inside. His expression was resolved, though strain still showed around his eyes. "I've made a decision," he announced. "I'm going to meet with Dad on Monday and give him an ultimatum. Either he comes clean about the trust mismanagement and makes it right, or I walk away from the firm and we take legal action." "Are you sure?" I asked, knowing how much his position at Westfield Financial meant to him. Ethan nodded. "I can't build my career on a foundation of deception, and I can't look at myself in the mirror knowing I'm complicit in what they've done. To you." His willingness to put his relationship with our parents and his career on the line for me was overwhelming. For the first time since discovering the fraud, I felt tears threatening. "Thank you," I managed to say. "But I don't want you to sacrifice everything. Let me meet with the attorney Rebecca recommended first. Maybe there's a way to address this that doesn't cost you your future at the firm." "The firm was grandfather's legacy, not Dad's," Ethan replied firmly. "If anything, I'm protecting that legacy by refusing to let it be tainted by financial misconduct." We agreed that I would meet with Sarah Chen on Monday, while Ethan would delay his confrontation with our father until we had legal advice. As I prepared to leave, Ethan surprised me with a tight hug. "I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening to you all these years," he said. "I was so focused on meeting expectations that I didn't question whether those expectations were fair or even legitimate." "We were both blind in different ways," I replied, "but we're seeing clearly now." The next morning, I arrived at Revel Cafe 10 minutes early, a folder containing my various financial statements tucked under my arm. Despite everything that had happened with the trust discovery, I felt a strange sense of purpose about addressing my debt. It was something concrete I could control amid the chaos of family betrayal. Cameron arrived precisely at 11, casually dressed in jeans and a navy sweater that made him look younger than he did at the office. He spotted me at a corner table and waved, stopping to order coffee before joining me. "Thanks for meeting." "On a Sunday," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I thought you might want to address this sooner rather than later." "I appreciate it," I replied honestly. "Especially now." He raised an eyebrow. "Something new happened with your family situation?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to unburden myself about everything we'd discovered, but professional boundaries suggested I should keep personal drama separate from this financial assistance he was offering. "Let's just say I've gained some perspective on my so-called financial irresponsibility," I said carefully. "It turns out the people judging me might not have the moral high ground they claimed." Cameron nodded, not pressing for details. "Family. Financial dynamics are rarely as simple as they appear on the surface." He pulled out a folder of his own. "Shall we get started?" For the next hour, we went through his proposed plan in detail. He had created a spreadsheet that broke down my debts by interest rate and balanced aggressive payments with maintaining a small emergency fund. The approach was methodical but not punishing. It allowed for modest entertainment expenses and even a small travel fund. "This is more generous than I expected," I admitted, reviewing the numbers. "I thought you'd tell me I needed to eat ramen and never leave my apartment for 3 years." Cameron smiled. "Extreme austerity plans fail for the same reason crash diets do. They're not sustainable. You need a path that you can actually follow without burning out or feeling so deprived that you give up." His approach was refreshingly practical and free of judgment. We discussed each category of expense, making adjustments based on my actual habits rather than some theoretical ideal. By the time we finished our second coffees, I had a customized plan that felt challenging, but achievable. "There's one more thing," Cameron said, pulling another document from his folder. "This is information about a debt consolidation loan through a credit union I belong to. Their rates are significantly lower than your credit cards. If you qualify, and I think you would, you could potentially cut your repayment time by almost a year." I studied the paperwork. "Why are you doing all this for me? We barely knew each other before Friday." Cameron was quiet for a moment, rotating his empty coffee cup between his hands. "When I was 27, I almost lost everything. I had a promising career at a prestigious firm in New York, but I was living far beyond my means trying to keep up with colleagues from wealthy backgrounds. The debt spiraled until I couldn't see a way out." "What happened?" I asked. "The firm's CFO noticed I was showing signs of extreme stress. Instead of reporting me to management, she took me aside and helped me create a debt management plan. She even co-signed a consolidation loan when my credit was too damaged to qualify on my own." His expression grew serious. "She saved my financial future, and possibly my life. I promised myself I'd pay it forward if I ever had the chance." The parallel to my situation was striking, though in my case, the people who should have helped me had instead compounded the problem with their judgment and deception. "Thank you," I said simply, not just for the plan, but for seeing me as someone worth helping. Something shifted in Cameron's expression, a warmth that went beyond professional courtesy. "For what it's worth, Olivia, I think your parents' assessment of you is wildly inaccurate. From what I've seen at work, You're creative, dedicated, and insightful. A few financial missteps in your 20s don't define your character or your future." His words touched something deep inside me, the part that had been starved for approval and recognition for as long as I could remember. But unlike the conditional approval I'd sought from my parents, Cameron's assessment was based on who I actually was, not who he thought I should be. We parted with plans to check in weekly on my financial progress. As I walked home through the spring sunshine, I felt lighter despite the weight of everything that had happened. For the first time in years, I believed I could find my way out of the financial hole I'd dug, not because a trust fund would rescue me, but because I had the capacity to rescue myself with the right support and guidance. Monday morning arrived, with a mixture of dread and determination. I had an appointment with Sarah Chen at 2 p.m., which meant a half day at work before confronting the legal implications of my parents' betrayal. As I prepared for the day, my phone chimed with a text from Ethan. "Dad just called. Wants to meet for lunch. I think he knows something's up. Should I go?" I texted back quickly. "Wait until after my meeting with the attorney. We need to know our options first." 3 dots appeared as he typed his response. "Too late. Already agreed. Noon at the Capitol Grill. Don't worry, I won't tip our hand." Completely. I stared at the message, anxiety knotting my stomach. Ethan was smart and strategic in business, but our father had decades of experience manipulating both of us. What if he managed to convince Ethan that what we'd found was a misunderstanding or somehow justified? At work, I struggled to focus on the Velocity activewear campaign. Marco noticed my distraction during the morning team meeting but didn't comment on it beyond asking if I needed any support with my workload. Cameron caught my eye across the conference room, giving me a subtle nod that somehow conveyed understanding and encouragement. At 1:30, I left the office for my appointment with Sarah Chen. Blackwell & Associates occupied several floors of a sleek high-rise downtown, its reception area decorated in muted grays and blues that conveyed serious professionalism without ostentation. Sarah Chen proved to be a petite woman in her early 40s with a direct gaze and a firm handshake. "Rebecca briefed me on your situation," she said once we were settled in her office. "But I'd like to hear it from you, along with seeing the documentation you've gathered." I recounted the entire story, from the original trust revelation, after my grandfather's death, through my parents' persistent messaging about my financial inadequacy, to our discovery of the misappropriated funds. Sarah took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification but maintaining a neutral expression throughout. "Based on what you've shared in these documents," she said when I'd finished, "you have a very strong case for breach of fiduciary duty. The regular withdrawals described as administrative expenses but transferred to your mother's personal account constitute clear mismanagement at best, fraud at worst." "What are my options?" I asked, repeating the question I'd posed to Rebecca. "Legally, you have grounds to petition for their removal as trustees and for recovery of all misappropriated funds plus interest. Given the amount involved, over $1 million by your estimate, this is a substantial case." She leaned forward slightly. "However, I sense you have reservations about pursuing the most aggressive approach." I nodded. "They're still my parents, despite everything. And my brother works for my father. I don't want to destroy his career in the process of seeking justice." Sarah considered this. "There are intermediate options. We could present your parents with evidence of the breach and propose a settlement that would restore your beneficiary status, implement proper financial controls on the trust, and potentially recover some portion of the misused funds." Would they still be trustees? That's negotiable. One possibility would be to add an independent co-trustee, a financial institution or trust company, that would have oversight of all distributions and expenses. This would allow your parents to save face socially while preventing further misuse. The approach sounded reasonable, though the thought of continuing any financial relationship with my parents after their betrayal was difficult to imagine. And if they refused to settle? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Then we proceed with formal legal action. The evidence you've gathered is compelling. While trust litigation can be complex and time-consuming, I believe you would ultimately prevail. As we continued discussing strategy, my phone began vibrating with multiple incoming texts. When I finally checked it, I saw 5 messages from Ethan, each more urgent than the last. Dad knows something. He asked about our trip to the summer house. He's pressing me about what we were looking for. Says the caretaker noticed the study had been disturbed. Liv, he's threatening to fire me if I don't come clean about your scheme. He's calling Mom to join us. This is escalating. What should I do? The final message had arrived just minutes ago. They're both here now. It's getting ugly. They're saying we committed criminal trespass. Dad's threatening legal action against you specifically. I need backup. Capitol Grill, private dining room, 3. My heart raced as I showed the messages to Sarah. This is happening right now, about 5 blocks from here. She checked her watch. We have 2 options. Either you go there alone with me on standby by phone, or I accompany you as your legal counsel. The latter makes this an immediate legal confrontation, which may escalate things further, but also provides immediate protection. I thought about my brother facing our parents alone, about the decades of manipulation and control that had shaped our family dynamics. I want you with me, I decided. It's time to end the power imbalance. Sarah nodded, gathering her materials. Then let's go face them together. Remember, you're not the one who breached trust here. You're seeking accountability for legitimate wrongs. Stand firm in that knowledge. As we left her office for the short walk to the restaurant, I felt a strange calm descend. The anxiety and shame that had characterized my relationship with my family for so long had been replaced by something stronger. The certainty that I was finally standing up, not just for my inheritance, but for my worth. The bank statements had revealed my parents' financial fraud. But more importantly, they had freed me from the fraudulent narrative about myself that I had accepted for too long. Whatever happened in that private dining room, I would never again measure my value by their flawed judgment. I walked toward the confrontation with my head high, no longer the family disappointment, but a woman reclaiming her rightful place in the trust, in the family, and in her own life. The Capitol Grill's private dining rooms were located on Sajinam, the restaurant's second level, accessible via a curved staircase lined with portraits of Boston's historical figures. As Sarah Chen and I climbed the stairs, I caught my reflection in a decorative mirror, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with determination rather than the anxious uncertainty that had been my companion for so long. Remember, Sarah said quietly, as we approached private dining room 3, you control the narrative now. Don't let them make this about your financial choices or about the fact that you accessed documents at the summer house. This is about their breach of fiduciary duty. I nodded, squaring my shoulders before knocking firmly on the mahogany door. A server opened it, revealing a tense tableau inside. My father stood at the head of the table, mid-sentence, his face flushed with anger. My mother sat rigidly in a chair to his right, her perfect posture and immaculate appearance at odds with the distress in her eyes. Ethan, opposite her, looked simultaneously relieved and alarmed to see me. Olivia, my father's voice turned cold as he registered my presence. This is a private family discussion. I don't recall inviting you. I invited her, Ethan said, standing to join me. Since you're discussing her inheritance, she should be present. My father's gaze shifted to Sarah, his eyes narrowing. And who is this? I gestured for Sarah to remain by the door while I stepped further into the room. My attorney, Sarah Chen of Blackwell & Associates. She specializes in trust litigation. The word litigation landed like a physical blow. My mother's hand flew to her throat, fingering the strand of pearls she never went without. My father's expression hardened, but I caught the flicker of fear in his eyes before he masked it with indignation. "You brought a lawyer to a family lunch?" he scoffed. "That's dramatic even for you, Olivia." "I thought it appropriate given that you're threatening legal action against your own children for discovering your misappropriation of trust funds," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. The server, sensing the tension, quietly excused himself and closed the door behind him. "Misappropriation?" My mother's voice rose an octave. "What are you talking about? Richard? What is she talking about?" My father's jaw tightened. "Nothing. She's trying to distract from the fact that she and Ethan broke into the summer house and rifled through private documents." "Not nothing," Ethan interjected. "We found the original trust documents, Dad. The ones that don't include any financial responsibility conditions that would allow you to cut Olivia out." "And we found the bank statements," I added, moving to stand beside my brother. "The ones showing $30,000 transferred from the trust to Mom's personal account every month for years, labeled as administrative expenses." My mother's face drained of color. She turned to my father, her expression a mixture of shock and something else. Fear? Complicity? "Richard?" He ignored her, focusing his anger on us. "You had no right to access those documents. That's an invasion of privacy, potentially criminal." "Actually," Sarah spoke for the first time, stepping forward with professional confidence, "as beneficiaries of the trust, Ms. Westfield and her brother have every right to see trust documents and financial statements. It's the trustees who have legally questionable behavior to account for." My father's eyes darted between us. I recognized the calculation happening behind them, the same strategic assessment he brought to difficult business negotiations. He was looking for leverage, for a way to regain control of the situation. "Sit down," he finally said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "All of you." Sarah placed a hand on my arm. "Before we continue, I should note that I'm recording this conversation for my client's protection. Is that acceptable to everyone?" "Absolutely not," my father snapped. "Then we'll need to reschedule this discussion at my office with a court reporter present," Sarah replied smoothly. A tense silence followed. My father and mother exchanged glances, having one of those wordless conversations long-married couples perfect. "Fine," my father conceded. "Record if you must." We took seats, at the table, Sarah positioning herself between Ethan and me on one side, facing my parents across the polished mahogany. The elaborate place settings and crystal water glasses seemed absurdly formal for the raw confrontation unfolding. "Let me be clear about why we're here," Sarah began, her tone professionally detached. "My client has evidence suggesting a systematic misuse of trust assets over several years, as well as deceptive practices regarding the terms of the trust itself. This meeting is an opportunity to address these issues before formal legal proceedings become necessary." My father leaned forward. "This is absurd. Any distributions from the trust have been properly documented and authorized under my discretion as trustee." "The trust document grants no such discretion," Ethan countered. "We've read it thoroughly. It specifies quarterly distributions to beneficiaries beginning at age 30, with no conditional clauses about financial responsibility or trustee discretion. Administrative expenses are allowed under any trust arrangement," my father argued. Basic trust law. Administrative expenses are defined as necessary costs to maintain the trust, legal fees, accounting services, reasonable trustee compensation, Sarah replied. "Not $30,000 monthly transfers to a trustee's spouse's personal account." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "The money was used for legitimate trust purposes," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "What legitimate trust purposes required it to go through your personal account, Mom?" I asked, forcing myself to meet her gaze directly. And why wasn't any of it documented as such in the trust accounting? She looked away, unable to hold my stare. My father stepped in to fill the silence. "This is a simple misunderstanding," he said, his tone softening to the one he used when trying to close difficult deals. "Perhaps I've been less than transparent about certain administrative arrangements. We can review the accounting together, make any necessary adjustments." "There's no misunderstanding," I interrupted, refusing to be lulled by his sudden reasonableness. "You systematically diverted funds meant for your children's inheritance, while simultaneously criticizing me for financial irresponsibility. You lied about the trust conditions to manipulate and control us." My directness seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the mask of paternal authority slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man behind it. Not the infallible financial titan I'd been raised to revere, but someone capable of deception and hypocrisy. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly weary. Sarah pulled out a document from her briefcase. "My client is prepared to offer terms for resolution without court intervention. They include immediate reinstatement of Ms. Westfield as a beneficiary with full rights to distributions, appointment of an independent co-trustee with oversight authority, a full accounting of all trust transactions since inception, and restitution of misappropriated funds." She slid the document across the table. My father didn't touch it. "And if we refuse?" he challenged. "Then we proceed with a formal petition to the court for your removal as trustees, an independent forensic accounting of all trust transactions, and recovery of all misused funds plus interest and legal fees," Sarah stated matter-of-factly. "Given the evidence we've gathered, I'm confident in our likelihood of success." My mother reached for her water glass with a trembling hand. "Richard, perhaps we should—" "Be quiet, Eleanor," he snapped, causing her to flinch. The harshness of his tone shocked me. I'd never seen him speak to her that way before. He turned to Ethan, changing tactics. "And what about you? Are you prepared to destroy your career over this? Your future at the firm? Everything I've built for you?" Ethan met his gaze steadily. "I'm prepared to stand for integrity, which is what you always claimed the Westfield name represented. If that costs me my position at a firm built on deception, so be it." My father's face darkened with anger, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was rapidly losing ground and knew it. "I need time to review these demands with our attorney," he finally said. "You have 48 hours, Sarah replied firmly. "After that, we file our petition with the court." As the meeting concluded, my mother finally spoke directly to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Olivia, you don't understand. The money. There were reasons." I paused, curious despite myself. "What reasons, Mom?" Her eyes darted to my father, who was speaking tensely. With Sarah near the door, "I can't." "Not here. Come to the house tomorrow. Alone. Please." Something in her expression, vulnerability I'd rarely seen, made me nod briefly before joining Sarah and Ethan as we departed. Once outside on the sidewalk, I felt my legs go weak with the release of tension. "You were magnificent," Ethan said, pulling me into a quick hug. Dad never saw it coming. "We've made our position clear," Sarah added. "Now we wait for their response. Don't be surprised if they start with bluster and threats before moving toward settlement. It's a common pattern when powerful people face accountability." "What about meeting with Mom tomorrow?" I asked, sharing her request. Sarah frowned. "Legally, I'd advise against any private conversations without counsel present. It could be an attempt to manipulate you emotionally or to get you to reveal our strategy." "Or," Ethan suggested, "she might genuinely have information that could help us understand what's been happening. Mom's always been more of a follower than a leader in their relationship." I considered both perspectives. "I'll think about it. For now, I need to get back to work before I miss the entire day. As I turned to leave, Sarah caught my arm. One more thing, Olivia. The way you carried yourself in there, that confidence, and clarity, hold on to that. It's your true inheritance, one they can never take away. Her words stayed with me as I returned to the agency, slipping back into my cubicle just as the afternoon strategy meeting was wrapping up. Marco raised an eyebrow at my late return but didn't comment. Cameron, however, noticed my slightly disheveled appearance and the lingering tension in my posture. He stopped by my desk later that afternoon, voice lowered. "Everything okay? You seem different." I considered how much to share. I had a meeting about the family trust situation. Let's just say it was intense but necessary. "Good for you," he said, his expression warm with genuine support. "Standing up for yourself is hard, especially with family. It takes courage." I'm learning that I have more of that than I realized. His smile deepened. "I've suspected that about you since we started working together. You have this quiet resilience that's really remarkable." The compliment caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because I was starting to believe it might be true. The woman who had confronted her parents today was indeed resilient, capable of fighting for what was rightfully hers. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the debt management plan Cameron had created. The structured approach to tackling what had once seemed an insurmountable burden felt empowering rather than restrictive. Each payment would be a step toward financial independence, not because my parents demanded it as a condition of worthiness, but because I chose it for myself. As I worked through the numbers, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Warily, I answered. "Olivia? It's Rebecca. I'm using my office line because I didn't want Ethan to know I was calling you." My brother's fiance's secretive approach immediately put me on alert. "What's going on?" "Your father came to our apartment about an hour ago looking for Ethan. When I said he wasn't home, he started. I don't know how to describe it. Ranting, I guess, about ungrateful children and betrayal. He'd clearly been drinking." My stomach tightened. "Is he still there? Are you safe?" "He left after about 15 minutes. I'm fine, just rattled. But Olivia, he said something you should know about. Something about your mother having a separate arrangement with your grandfather that your father found out about after his death. He wasn't making much sense, but he kept saying the money was rightfully Eleanor's all along." The cryptic statement aligned with my mother's request to meet privately. Did he elaborate? No, he got a call and left abruptly. I tried asking Ethan about it when he got home, but he doesn't know anything about a separate arrangement between your mother and grandfather. Thanks for letting me know, Rebecca. I appreciate you reaching out. After hanging up, I sat with this new information, turning it over in my mind. What arrangement could my mother have had with my grandfather that would justify regular withdrawals from the trust? And why had she never mentioned it during the confrontation? The next morning, I made a decision. I would meet with my mother, as requested, not out of obligation or manipulation, but because the full truth mattered if I was going to move forward with clear eyes. I texted Sarah to inform her of my decision and assured her I would record the conversation and share. Nothing about our legal strategy. My childhood home in Greenwich loomed as imposing as ever as I pulled into the circular driveway. Spring flowers lined the manicured beds, my mother's prized tulips standing at attention like colorful soldiers. The house had always felt more like a showpiece than a home, its perfect surfaces and designer furnishings prioritized over comfort or personal expression. I rang the doorbell rather than using my key, a small act of boundary setting that felt significant. My mother answered, quickly, as if she'd been waiting nearby. Her usual impeccable appearance had slipped. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore minimal makeup that didn't quite conceal the shadows under her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping back to let me enter. "Your father is at the office all day." She led me not to the formal living room where family discussions typically occurred, but to her private sitting room adjacent to the master suite, a space I'd rarely been invited into as a child. The room was surprisingly intimate, with comfortable chairs, family photos I'd never seen displayed elsewhere, and bookshelves filled with novels rather than the leather-bound classics that populated the main library for show. "Would you like tea?" she asked, gesturing to a service already set up on a small table. I nodded, watching as she poured with slightly trembling hands. This vulnerability from my always composed mother was disconcerting. "What did you want to tell me?" asked once we were settled with steaming cups. She took a deep breath. "It's a long story, and not one I'm proud of keeping from you and Ethan, but you need to understand the context of the trust situation." Setting down her cup, she reached for a small lacquered box on a nearby shelf, removing a folded document, yellowed with age. "This is a letter your grandfather wrote to me shortly before his death. I've never shown it to anyone, not even your father." She handed it to me. The handwritten pages were covered in my grandfather's distinctive script. Formal, precise, with old-fashioned flourishes. "Read it," she urged. "Then I'll explain the rest." The letter began with formal address, but quickly turned personal. "My dear Eleanor, as I face the reality of my mortality, there are truths that must be acknowledged between us. The business partnership Harold Westfield and Associates presented to the world was, as you know, built as much on your financial acumen as on my connections. The capital that launched our early successes came substantially from your family's resources, invested discreetly through channels that maintained the fiction of my sole entrepreneurship. Your willingness to remain invisible in our business dealings, a position society and my own pride demanded, represents a sacrifice for which I have never adequately compensated you. The success of Westfield Financial rests on a foundation you helped establish but for which you have received neither credit nor appropriate financial return. The arrangement we made 30 years ago, whereby your contributions would eventually be repaid through a separate channel, has weighed on my conscience. Richard must never know the extent of your involvement or the true origins of the family fortune. His pride would not withstand the knowledge that his father's vaunted financial empire began with his wife's family money and business intelligence. I have therefore structured the family trust to include provision for these repayments to be made to you personally, disguised as administrative expenses to maintain the narrative we've crafted for decades. The enclosed account details and payment schedule will ensure you finally receive what has long been owed to you. You have been not just a daughter-in-law, but a silent partner in everything the Westfield name has achieved. May this belated acknowledgement provide some measure of justice. With respect and gratitude, Harold." I looked up from the letter, stunned. "Grandfather owed you money? Your family funded the start of Westfield Financial?" My mother nodded, her expression a complex mixture of shame and defiance. "My family had significant wealth from banking interests in Philadelphia. When I married your father, my father was concerned about Richard's ambitious but untested business plans. Rather than investing openly, which would have wounded your father's pride, we channeled the investments through Harold, who was more pragmatic about accepting help, so the monthly transfers were repayment of my family's initial investment, plus agreed-upon returns," she confirmed. "Your grandfather set it up that way in the trust because he knew Richard would never agree to it if he discovered the truth." Harold's pride was enormous, but he was an honorable businessman at heart. He wanted to settle his debts before he died. I tried to process this revelation. "Why didn't you say this yesterday during the confrontation?" She looked away. "Because Richard doesn't know. He still believes the Westfield financial legacy began purely with his father's genius, finding out that his wife's family provided the seed capital that made everything possible. It would destroy something fundamental in him. So you've protected his ego all these years while allowing him to belittle me for financial irresponsibility?" To cut me out of a trust that exists partly because of your family's money. Tears welled in my mother's eyes. I've made many compromises to maintain peace, Olivia. Too many. When Richard decided to invoke the non-existent responsibility clause, to cut you out, I should have stood up to him. I didn't, and I'm ashamed of that. The anger I expected to feel was tempered by an unexpected sadness for this woman who had subsumed her own financial contributions and intelligence to protect a man's pride for decades. What happens now? I asked. I've told Richard I want an independent co-trustee appointed, as your attorney suggested, and that you must be reinstated immediately as a beneficiary. Her voice strengthened with each word. I've also made it clear that if he doesn't agree, I'll be forced to reveal the true history of Westfield Financial's founding. For the first time I could remember, my mother looked at me not as a disappointment to be managed or a problem to be solved, but as an equal, a woman standing up for what was rightfully hers. It won't fix everything between us, she acknowledged. Too much has happened, too many hurtful words spoken, but it's a start toward honesty at least. As I left my childhood home that afternoon, the spring air felt different somehow, clearer, fresher, full of possibility. The bank statements had indeed changed everything, revealing not just financial deception, but generations of hidden truths and compromised identities. More importantly, they had catalyzed my own transformation from someone defined by others' judgments to a woman capable of confronting difficult truths and standing firmly in her own power. Whatever happened with the trust, whether my father accepted the settlement terms or we proceeded to court, I knew I would never again measure my worth by the flawed metrics my family had established. The journey toward financial redemption and self-reclamation had only just begun. But for the first time in my adult life, I was walking that path with my head held high, no longer the family disappointment, but the author of my own story, one in which responsibility, integrity, and self-worth would be defined on my own terms. The next morning dawned with unusual clarity. I woke before my alarm, feeling a strange lightness despite the complexity of the situation still unfolding with my family. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of perceived inadequacy on my shoulders. Knowledge, even painful, knowledge had freed me from the prison of false narratives. I dressed with particular care for work, choosing a bold emerald blouse I'd previously thought too much for the office. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, more present, more solid in her own skin. As I applied my makeup, my phone chimed with a text from Sarah Chen. Your parents' attorney reached out. They want to discuss settlement terms. Meeting set for Thursday at 2 p.m. at our offices. Progress. A mixture of relief and apprehension washed through me. Their willingness to negotiate suggested my mother had followed through on her promise, to pressure my father. But I knew Richard Westfield well enough to anticipate that he wouldn't surrender control easily, regardless of the leverage against him. At the agency, the morning passed in a productive blur. The Velocity Activewear campaign was moving forward with my authenticity concept, and Marco had assigned me to lead the creative team, a vote of confidence that would have thrilled me just a week ago. Now, while still gratifying, it felt like just one aspect of a life expanding beyond the narrow parameters of parental approval I'd been trapped in for so long. During lunch, I received an unexpected email from Ethan. Liv, something strange is happening at the firm. Dad called an emergency partners meeting this morning, then locked himself in his office for hours. Jerry Matthews, senior partner, just stopped by my office to casually ask if I have any interest in taking on more leadership responsibilities. When I pressed for details, he mentioned something about succession planning needing to accelerate. I think Dad might be preparing for fallout from our trust situation. Or maybe Mom told him more than we know. Either way, thought you should be aware. Love you. E. I forwarded the email to Sarah with a quick note asking her thoughts, then headed to the small conference room where I'd scheduled a catch-up with Cameron to review my first week on the debt management plan. He was already there when I arrived, his laptop open beside a small plant in a terracotta pot. "What's this?" I asked, gesturing to the plant. "Jade plant," he replied with a slightly self-conscious smile. "They're symbols of financial prosperity. In some cultures. Thought it might be a good mascot for your debt reduction journey." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me. "Thank you. That's really kind." "How has the first week been?" he asked, getting down to business. I pulled out my own laptop, opening the spreadsheet where I'd been tracking expenses against the plan. Better than expected, actually. I've already identified some subscription services I wasn't really using that I've canceled, and I found a more affordable cell phone plan. Cameron nodded approvingly as we reviewed the numbers. "You've already saved almost $150 monthly with those changes alone. That's significant." "It feels good," I admitted. "Not just the savings, but taking control instead of avoiding the problem." "That's often the biggest hurdle," he agreed. "Once you face the numbers directly, they lose some of their power to intimidate." We spent the next half hour fine-tuning some aspects of the plan, with Cameron suggesting a few additional opportunities for savings I hadn't considered. As we wrapped up, the conversation shifted to more personal territory. "Something's different about you this week," he observed. "You seem more present, confident." I hesitated, then decided there was no reason to be cryptic. The family trust situation is developing in unexpected ways. I confronted my parents about some financial irregularities, with my attorney present. It was intense but necessary. His eyes widened slightly. That took courage. "It's strange," I reflected. "All my life I've tiptoed around my parents' expectations and judgments, terrified of disappointment. But when I finally stood up to them, I realized their power over me was largely what I'd given them." "That's a profound realization," Cameron said. "Most people never get there." "Did you? With your family's financial expectations?" He looked down at his hands for a moment. "Eventually. It came after I hit rock bottom. I had to rebuild my financial life completely. And in doing that, I had to decide whose standards actually mattered to me." "And whose did?" "My own," he said simply. "Once I stopped trying to impress colleagues who earned twice what I did, or live up to my father's definition of success, I found I could create a life that was sustainable and genuinely satisfying." His words resonated deeply. For years, I'd been chasing a version of success defined by the Westfield family legacy, never questioning whether it aligned with my own values or strengths. "Would you want to continue this conversation over dinner sometime?" Cameron asked suddenly, then quickly added, "Completely understand if that crosses a professional line, given that we work together." The invitation surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. The connection between us had been building gradually, based on mutual respect and understanding rather than superficial attraction. "I'd like that," I replied. "Though maybe we should wait until after the trust situation is more settled. Right now, my life is complicated." He nodded, seeming relieved rather than disappointed by my measured response. "Absolutely. The offer stands whenever the timing feels right." That evening, I met Ethan and Rebecca at their condo to discuss the upcoming settlement meeting. Rebecca had ordered takeout from an upscale Thai restaurant, and we spread the containers across their dining table as Ethan filled me in on the day's developments at Westfield Financial. "Dad's definitely preparing for something," he said, serving himself green curry. "He's been meeting with the board members individually, and there's a persistent rumor that he's considering early retirement." "Retirement?" I echoed in disbelief. "Dad's entire identity is wrapped up in running the firm. I can't imagine him voluntarily stepping back." Rebecca passed me the pad thai. "Unless he's being forced to by circumstances." "Could your mother's revelation be putting that kind of pressure on him?" "It's possible," I acknowledged. Finding out that the Westfield financial empire was built partly on his wife's family money would be a serious blow to his ego. But serious enough to make him abandon the firm? That seems extreme. Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He checked the screen, frowning. Speaking of Dad. He stepped into the next room to take the call. Rebecca leaned toward E. How are you really doing with all this, Olivia? It's a lot to process. I considered the question seriously. Honestly, I'm doing better than I have in years. It's like I've been carrying this invisible weight my whole life, trying to prove my worth to people who were never going to acknowledge it. Now that I see the truth about them, about the family dynamics, I feel free. That's beautiful, Rebecca said warmly. And for what it's worth, I've always seen how exceptional you are. Your creativity, your resilience. Those qualities were obvious to everyone except your parents. Ethan returned, his expression troubled. That was strange. Dad wants to meet with me tomorrow morning. Alone, at the house, not the office. He specifically said not to tell you. Which is why you're telling me, I noted with appreciation. Of course. We're in this together now. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of anxiety he'd had since childhood. He sounded different, subdued, not angry like I expected. Do you think it's a trap? Rebecca asked, trying to get you alone to pressure you into backing down on the trust issue? I don't think so. It felt more like defeat, almost. I shared Sarah's text about the settlement meeting. Maybe he's coming to terms with the situation and wants to talk to you about the firm's future before the formal legal discussion. Maybe. Ethan didn't sound convinced. I'll go, but I'll be careful what I say. And I'll be on standby if you need backup, I promised. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how radically my relationship with Ethan had transformed in just a few weeks. The golden child and the disappointment, roles that had defined us and separated us for most of our lives, had dissolved, replaced by a partnership of equals facing a shared challenge. In some ways, this new connection with my brother was the most unexpected gift to emerge from the trust debacle. The next day passed slowly as I waited for news from Ethan. I threw myself into the Velocity campaign, finalizing the social media strategy and beginning work on the visual elements. Around noon, my phone finally buzzed with a text. Need to talk ASAP. Can you meet for coffee at 1, Thinking Grounds on Newbury? I made an excuse to Marco about needing to meet a potential freelance photographer and headed to the cafe, finding Ethan already there in a corner booth, 2 coffees on the table. His expression was unreadable. What happened? I asked, sliding in across from him. Ethan stared into his untouched coffee. Dad's resigning from the firm, effective immediately. What? Why? The news was shocking even after yesterday's speculation. It's complicated. Ethan glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. Apparently, there's more to the story than just Mom's family money. Dad's been playing fast and loose with some client accounts for years. Nothing illegal exactly, but aggressive strategies that have been covered up when they failed. He's been using trust money to cover shortfalls and hide losses from the board. I felt the blood drain from my face. So the trust withdrawals weren't just about Mom's repayment? Only partially. Some of it has been going to plug holes in client accounts that would have raised red flags with regulators. When we discovered the trust issues and threatened legal action, Dad knew a full accounting would potentially expose these other financial maneuvers. So he's falling on his sword to protect the firm, I surmised. Ethan nodded. And to protect himself from potential regulatory investigation. Early retirement due to health concerns looks better than being forced out under suspicion of financial impropriety. How does this affect the trust situation? He's agreed to all of our terms, reinstatement of your beneficiary status, independent co-trustee, full restitution of the misappropriated funds. Plus, he's transferring his majority ownership shares in the firm to me, effective immediately. I stared at him. He's giving you control of Westfield Financial? Just like that? With conditions, Ethan qualified. I have to keep the scandal contained and maintain the story that his retirement is health-related. And he hesitated. He wants you to sign a non-disclosure agreement about everything. The trust mismanagement, Mom's family money, his financial maneuvering at the firm. The request felt like a final attempt to control my narrative, to silence me even as he was forced to concede on the financial issues. What do you think I should do? Ethan looked me directly in the eyes. I think you should decide based on what will bring you peace, not what will satisfy Dad's need to preserve his reputation. If publicly exposing him would help you heal from years of his criticism and manipulation, I'll support you completely, even if it means damaging the firm. His willingness to put my well-being above the family business moved me deeply. And what about you? Are you ready to take over the firm under these circumstances? A complex mixture of emotions crossed his face. Anxiety, determination, a touch of excitement. Honestly, I've been preparing for this role my entire life, just not expecting it so soon or under these conditions. But maybe this is an opportunity to rebuild Westfield Financial with integrity, to honor grandfather's original vision while creating something that reflects our values, not Dad's. I considered all the angles. Exposing my father's financial misconduct might provide momentary satisfaction, but it would also hurt innocent people, employees of the firm, clients who trusted the Westfield name. And it would devastate my mother, who, despite her complicity in some aspects of the deception, was taking steps toward honesty and accountability. I don't need to publicly humiliate Dad to move forward, I decided. I'll sign the NDA, provided the trust situation is fully resolved, as agreed, but I want something additional. Name it, Ethan said immediately. I want you to create a position for me at Westfield Financial, not as a financial advisor or in Dad's mold, but utilizing my actual strengths, Director of Marketing and Client Communications, or something similar. A real role with real responsibility, not a token family placement. Ethan's surprise quickly transformed into a broad smile. You'd consider working for the family firm? After everything? Not for the family firm, I clarified. For my brother's firm. One that I believe could represent something better than what our father built. He extended his hand across the table. Deal, and it would be an actual value add. For the company, our marketing is stuck in the 1990s. We desperately need someone with contemporary vision. We shook on it, this new partnership representing a future neither of us could have imagined just weeks ago. The formal settlement meeting the next day was anticlimactic after the private family revelations. My father, looking unusually subdued, in a suit that suddenly seemed too large for his frame, signed the documents without protest. My mother, sitting beside him, occasionally reached to squeeze his hand. A gesture of support I found both touching and troubling given all that had transpired. Sarah led us efficiently through the legal process, her professional demeanor never wavering despite the emotional undercurrents in the room. When the final document was signed, she turned to me with satisfaction. Congratulations, Olivia. You're officially reinstated as a full beneficiary of the Westfield Family Trust, with your first distribution due on your 30th birthday as originally intended. The independent co-trustee will be in place by next week, and the restitution payments will begin immediately. My father stood abruptly, extending his hand to Sarah. Thank you for your professionalism in this matter, he said stiffly, then turned to leave without directly acknowledging me. My mother lingered, an uncertainty in her expression I'd never seen before. Olivia, I hope someday we can rebuild, something between us, something honest. I hope so too, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. But it will take time. She nodded, accepting this partial olive branch before following my father out. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed with breathtaking speed. I gave notice at the advertising agency, explaining to a disappointed Marco that I had an opportunity to revamp the marketing strategy for a major financial firm. Cameron and I had our postponed dinner, which led to another, and then another. The relationship developing naturally and without pressure as we both focused on our respective transitions. Ethan formally announced our father's retirement and his own ascension to CEO, presenting me as the new director of marketing and brand strategy in the same press conference. The financial media buzzed with speculation about the sudden leadership change, but the health-related narrative held, supported by my father's increasingly reclusive behavior. At Westfield Financial, I discovered an unexpected passion for translating complex financial concepts into accessible communications. My outsider perspective proved valuable in identifying ways the firm's messaging had become stale and disconnected from younger potential clients. Ethan gave me genuine autonomy to implement changes, backing my decisions even when they met resistance from old guard partners accustomed to my father's approaches. The first distribution from the trust arrived, on my 30th birthday, a substantial sum that would have once seemed like the ultimate validation from my family. Instead, I viewed it pragmatically as a resource to further my goals. I used a portion to fully eliminate my remaining credit card debt, following through on the plan Cameron had helped me create. The rest I invested conservatively, no longer feeling the need to prove my financial acumen through aggressive strategies. 6 months after the confrontation at the Capitol Grill, I closed on a modest but charming condo in Cambridge, my first home purchase, achieved through a combination of trust funds and my own savings. As I stood in the empty space planning renovations, Cameron by my side offering design suggestions, I felt a profound sense of having come full circle. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about bank statements," I replied with a small smile. "How pieces of paper with numbers on them changed everything." "The bank statements didn't change you," he countered, taking my hand. "They just revealed the truth, which allowed the real you to emerge. You were always this capable, this worthy. You just needed to believe it yourself." His assessment resonated with the journey I'd been on. The trust drama had been painful, yes, family illusions shattered, uncomfortable truths exposed. But from that wreckage, I'd salvaged something infinitely more valuable than money, an unshakable belief in my own worth that no one could ever take away. My parents had labeled me financially irresponsible based on a young adult's credit card debt while secretly misappropriating millions. The irony wasn't lost on me. But more important than their hypocrisy was the lesson it had taught me about defining success and responsibility on my own terms. True financial responsibility, I now understood, wasn't about perfect decisions or impressive account balances. It was about transparency, integrity, and using resources in alignment with genuine values. By that definition, I had always been more financially responsible than my parents, despite their wealth and status. As I moved through my new home, imagining the life I would build within these walls, I felt gratitude for the painful revelations that had set me free. The bank statements had changed everything, transforming me from the family disappointment to a woman standing confidently in her own power, writing her own financial story, and defining success by standards that actually mattered. Some might call it ironic that I now worked for the family firm I had once felt so alienated from. But under Ethan's leadership and with my input, it was becoming a different kind of institution, one built on transparency and genuine value rather than ego and appearance. We were reconstructing the Westfield legacy, reimagining what it could represent for future generations. And in my own quiet way, I was reconstructing myself, not as the anti-Westfield rebel I'd unconsciously become in reaction to my parents' criticism, nor as the perfect financial prodigy I could never be. Instead, I was becoming simply, authentically, Olivia, a woman who understood her worth could never be calculated on a balance sheet, whose value was intrinsic rather than earned through others' approval. The bank statements had revealed my parents' deception. But the real revelation had been about myself, that I had always been enough, just as I was, and that understanding was worth more than any trust fund could ever provide. 1 year after the trust settlement, I stood at the podium in Westfield Financial's newly renovated conference center, preparing to unveil the company's rebranded identity to a room full of clients, employees, and financial media. The Westfield logo, unchanged for 30 years, had been reimagined under my direction to reflect the firm's evolution, more transparent, more inclusive, more aligned with contemporary values while honoring its historical foundations. Ethan, immaculate in his tailored suit, yet approachable in a way our father never was, introduced me with genuine pride. And now, our director of marketing and brand strategy, and the visionary behind our transformation, my sister, Olivia Westfield. The applause felt different from any professional recognition I'd previously received. This wasn't just acknowledgement of work well done. It was validation of a place truly earned through merit, rather than obligation or nepotism. "Thank you," I began, surveying the attentive faces. When my grandfather founded this company, he built it on a principle that sometimes got lost in later years, that true wealth isn't measured solely by numbers on a statement, but by the impact we have and the legacy we create. I didn't mention what I now knew, that my grandmother's family had provided much of the initial capital, or that my mother's financial acumen had helped shape early strategies. Those private truths had been acknowledged within our family, but some stories weren't mine alone to share publicly. Today, we're not just revealing a new logo or updated corporate colors, I continued. We're recommitting to the values that should always have defined us: transparency in all client relationships, integrity in every transaction, and the understanding that managing someone's finances means being entrusted with their dreams, their security, and their future. The presentation continued with Ethan detailing specific policy changes and new service offerings. I watched the audience respond with increasing enthusiasm as they recognized that this wasn't merely cosmetic rebranding, but substantive transformation. Near the back of the room, I noticed my mother sitting quietly, a small smile playing at her lips as she observed us, her children, rebuilding what previous generations had both created and compromised. My father had declined the invitation to attend. Since his abrupt retirement, he'd retreated to the family's Nantucket house, rarely venturing into public and communicating with Ethan primarily through terse emails about operational matters. The Tao, man who had dominated every room with his imposing presence and unwavering certainty, seemed to have collapsed inward once his carefully constructed narrative was dismantled. I didn't take satisfaction in his withdrawal. The goal had never been to destroy him, only to stop allowing his distorted values to define me. In recent months, I'd even found myself hoping he might eventually find a path toward reconciliation, though I no longer needed his approval to feel complete. After the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, I mingled with guests during the reception, discussing marketing strategies with partners who once would have dismissed me as the family disappointment. Cameron stood across the room, engaged in conversation with investors, but occasionally catching my eye with a private smile. Our relationship had deepened gradually over the past year, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than the superficial connections I'd pursued in my desperate Italian vacation phase. As the crowd thinned, my mother approached, elegant as always, but somehow softer around the edges. "That was remarkable, Olivia," she said, kissing my cheek. "Your grandfather would have been proud." "Which parts do you think he'd approve of?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She considered the question thoughtfully. "The substance behind the style. Harold always said that appearance without foundation was just illusion. You've given the company both, a contemporary image built on strengthened principles. That means a lot coming from you, I acknowledged. Our relationship remained complicated, too much history to simply reset, but we'd established a more honest foundation. Monthly lunches had become our tradition, conversations gradually moving beyond safe topics into more meaningful territory as trust slowly rebuilt. "How is Dad?" I asked, realizing I hadn't inquired about him in several weeks. Something flickered across her expression, concern, perhaps resignation. Struggling to redefine himself, his identity was so completely wrapped up in being Richard Westfield, financial titan. Without that role, he seems lost. I nodded, understanding more than I might have before my own journey of redefinition. "Do you think he'll ever adjust to the new reality?" "I hope so," she said simply, "for his sake, and for all of ours. But that's his journey to navigate, not ours to manage." Her words reflected a wisdom I'd only recently recognized in her, the capacity to distinguish between supporting someone and taking responsibility for their emotional well-being. It was a boundary I was still learning to establish in my own relationships. Later that evening, Ethan hosted a smaller celebration at his home for the core team who had worked on the rebranding initiative. As conversations flowed around the spacious living room, Rebecca pulled me aside onto the balcony overlooking the harbor. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small wrapped package. "A belated housewarming gift for your condo." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with a simple phrase, "Author your own story." "I remember what you said that night after you confronted your parents," Rebecca explained, "about finally becoming the author of your own story rather than a character in theirs. I thought you might want somewhere to document this new chapter." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched me deeply. "It's perfect. Thank you." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching boats navigate the harbor as twilight settled over the city. "You know what amazes me most about your journey this past year?" Rebecca finally said. "It's not just that you stood up to your parents or uncovered the truth about the trust. It's how you've transformed what could have been just a personal victory into something that benefits others." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The changes you and Ethan are implementing at Westfield Financial, the transparency policies, the educational initiatives for first-generation wealth builders, the emphasis on ethical investing. You're not just claiming your place, you're redefining what that place means and expanding it to include people who would never have been welcomed before." Her observation crystallized something I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. The most meaningful aspect of reclaiming my financial birthright hadn't been personal vindication, but the opportunity to reshape the values it represented. The following morning, I met Cameron for our standing Saturday breakfast at a small cafe near my Cambridge condo. These weekly financial check-ins had evolved from formal debt management reviews to broader discussions about our approaches to money, career aspirations, and life priorities. The jade plant he'd given me had thrived on my kitchen windowsill, its growth mirroring my own financial recovery. "How does it feel to be officially debt-free?" he asked as we settled at our usual corner table, referencing the final payment I'd made on my consolidated loan the previous day. "Surreal," I admitted. "After carrying that weight for so long, I keep expecting to feel it. Like a phantom limb, but a phantom burden." "That sensation will fade," he assured me. "Eventually, financial freedom just becomes your new normal." I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. It's not just the absence of debt that feels significant. It's knowing that I climbed out of it systematically, following a plan I committed to. Even with the trust distribution, I still approached it methodically, rather than just wiping the slate clean in one grand gesture. That's the difference between being gifted financial stability and earning it, Cameron observed. The process builds muscles that a windfall doesn't. His insight resonated with my evolving perspective on wealth and responsibility. Though the trust funds had accelerated my financial recovery, the deeper transformation had come through the disciplined approach to managing resources that Cameron had helped me develop. "I'm considering starting a workshop series," I shared, the idea having taken shape over recent weeks, "for young professionals struggling with debt shame and financial anxiety. Not just practical management tips, but addressing the emotional and psychological aspects." Cameron's eyes lit with interest. "That could be incredibly valuable. Financial literacy education tends to focus exclusively on the technical side, ignoring how deeply money intertwines with identity and self-worth." "Exactly. I keep thinking about how many others are where I was, carrying not just financial debt, but the emotional debt of feeling like failures for normal financial missteps. Imagine if they could learn earlier what took me 30 years to understand. That you're not defined by your financial mistakes. That, and that there's no single responsible way to approach money. That financial wellness looks different for different people and circumstances." I leaned forward, enthusiasm building as I articulated the concept. What if we created a space where people could examine their inherited money narratives and consciously choose which ones serve them and which need to be rewritten? Cameron reached across the table, taking my hand. "I think that's brilliant, and I'd be honored to help develop the curriculum if you want a co-facilitator." The offer, professional collaboration extending naturally from our personal connection, felt right in a way that previous relationships never had. With Cameron, I never had to compartmentalize parts of myself or pretend to be someone I wasn't. He had seen me at my most financially vulnerable and respected me more for the strength it took to face those challenges directly. That afternoon, I visited the summer house in the Berkshires for the first time since Ethan and I had discovered the trust documents. The property had stood vacant for months, my father preferring Nantucket and my mother spending most of her time in Greenwich. As trustee-approved renovations were scheduled to begin the following week, I had volunteered to inventory the personal items that should be preserved. Walking through the silent rooms, I was struck by how differently I perceived this space that had figured so prominently in my childhood. What once felt like an intimidating showcase of Westfield prosperity now seemed simply a house, beautiful but imperfect, filled with memories both pleasant and painful. In the study where we'd found the fateful bank statements, I stood before my grandfather's portrait, seeing him with new eyes. Not the infallible patriarch of family mythology, but a complex man who had built something meaningful, yet flawed, who had recognized my mother's contributions even while participating in their erasure from the official narrative. The safe behind the painting stood open, emptied of its most significant contents during the trust settlement process. But as I examined the bookshelves that had once intimidated me with their leather-bound financial tomes, I noticed a volume, slightly out of alignment. Pulling it free, I discovered it wasn't a book at all, but a journal similar to the one Rebecca had given me. The handwriting inside matched the letter my mother had shown me, my grandfather's distinctive script. As I carefully turned the pages, I realized I was reading his private reflections on building the family business, including candid acknowledgments of compromises made and principles sometimes sacrificed for expedience. One entry, dated shortly before his death, caught my attention. "I have built a legacy measured in dollars and prestige, yet find myself questioning its true value. What worth has financial empire building if the cost is measuring human worth solely by economic contribution?" I see this distortion growing in Richard, this inability to recognize that a balance sheet cannot capture a person's full measure. My hope rests with the grandchildren. Ethan shows promise beyond mere mathematical aptitude, an instinctive understanding of human needs beneath financial goals. And Olivia, though Richard fails to see it, possesses something perhaps more valuable: the courage to question inherited assumptions about what constitutes success. Perhaps the most meaningful legacy isn't the wealth itself, but the wisdom to Use it in service of authentic purpose rather than hollow achievement. I hope they discover this truth sooner than I have, in the twilight of my life. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal, carefully returning it to its place on the shelf. All those years believing I had failed to meet my grandfather's expectations, when in reality, he had seen value in me that my parents had missed entirely. Driving back to Cambridge as sunset painted the Berkshire Hills in golden light, I reflected on how profoundly my understanding of legacy had transformed. What once seemed a simple matter of inheritance and financial birthright had revealed itself as something far more complex. The stories we tell about money and worth, the values we choose to perpetuate or revise, the new narratives we create. From the raw materials of the past, the bank statements that had changed everything hadn't just exposed financial deception. They had catalyzed a deeper examination of the stories that had shaped my identity and limited my potential. In dismantling those false narratives, I had discovered the freedom to write a more authentic story. Not just for myself, but potentially for others still trapped in cycles of financial shame and distorted self-worth. As my apartment came into view, the jade plant visible in the window catching the last rays of daylight, I felt a profound sense of having come home to myself. The journey from family disappointment to financial empowerment had never really been about the money at all, but about reclaiming the authority to define my own value on terms that truly mattered. The trust that had once seemed the ultimate measure of familial approval now represented something far more meaningful: the opportunity to create a legacy of transparency, authenticity, and true responsibility, financial and otherwise, that future generations might build upon rather than have to dismantle. That was a birthright worth inheriting, and more importantly, worth recreating in my own unique vision. A legacy defined not by bank statements or balance sheets, but by the lives touched and the stories transformed along the way. Up next, you've